Hey everybody, and welcome to week 3. We are in the second week of our first unit, which focuses on narrative writing, really, and specifically on kind of real life instances where you're going to be using various types of rhetoric. Last week, you wrote your draft on the Common App. This week, you're going to work on, and last week, the focus was the rhetorical situation. This week, we're focusing on rhetorical moves that writers tend to make. And we do it all the time when we're speaking. And you do it anytime that you're posting something online. We just don't think about it in terms of, oh, I am going to make a deliberate rhetorical move right here. We don't think about it in those terms. So we're going to think about it with this assignment this week. And you're going to be working on your UC PIQs. Now, before you jump ahead and say, oh, but Miller, I already submitted my PIQs. Well, I'll talk about that, so just hang tight. All right, so the rhetorical moves are in these kind of pages from the textbook here. And the textbook it's not a textbook, it's like an online book. But these tools that writers use, again, that we all use, I should say, when we are trying to convey a message or a point. And we kind of have this intuitive sense of, oh, in order to get X, I know I am going to need to ask it in a specific way. So here's a great example. Let's say that you wanted to ask someone in your family for something that you really, really wanted, right? I'll think about my kids, for example, right? When my son was really begging for a phone, right? The way that he approached me and asked for a phone was really different than the way that he approached my husband and asked him, right? And what was he doing there? Well, he was evaluating the rhetorical situation. He knew who his audience was, and he knew who he was, right? And that decided on his purpose. That's the rhetorical situation from last week. So your kids, if you have kids, they're acutely aware of audience, right? And we are too, right? But this week, what we're thinking about now is, okay, so you have that awareness of audience. Now, what rhetorical move is going to work best given that rhetorical situation, right? And so my son might kind of plead and cry. He might get emotional. He might kind of use this narrative effect that you're going to read about. But with my husband, he is maybe a little more analytical than I am. He might go for the information route, the data route. Well, here's why I need the phone, bullet point A, B, C, D, E, right? Because he knows that that type of effect is going to work better on that audience. So what we're studying this week is really something that we kind of inherently know, but we don't think about it when we're sitting down to write, right? We think, again, when we're talking and when we're interacting with people, it's just kind of a natural thing we're thinking of, but not so much when we're writing. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do this week is to read through these pages. Again, they're not long. And they're meant to, again, kind of just get you thinking of, okay, so when would I use this effect? When or which audience would I use this, this effect for, right? And so that is going to be your first task here. The second task is about the UC PIQs. The UC personal insight questions are part of the transfer application that you are going to write on if you're applying to a UC. Now, if you have already applied and you wrote your PIQs, right? You selected from the group and you already wrote your PIQs, then for this assignment, I'm going to ask you to answer different questions. If you have maybe one that you're willing to revise, that's okay, but I'm going to ask you to write on different prompts. For the UC PIQs, you have to choose 4 different prompts. One of them is required, so I guess you only get to choose 3. So if you've already written them, you can use one that you've already written, but then choose 3 different prompts that you haven't written yet. But as you are working on these PIQs, what you're going to be doing now is thinking, okay, here's my rhetorical situation, and what writing effect, which one of these rhetorical effects am I going to need to use in order to kind of help my audience see that I'm a good candidate for this school, right? And that's what I'm asking you to think about in this discussion prompt. So the discussion prompt is due by Friday, and I want you to think about, first, you're going to have to decide which PIQs you want to answer. But then think about, okay, what's my approach here? Right? Again, we don't think about that all the time, but for things like scholarships and application essays, you absolutely should be thinking about your approach. Like, what's my approach? What is my audience going to need to hear from me? What do I think my audience wants to hear from me? And how can I use that as fuel for what I'm going to write about? Okay. So this discussion board is basically asking you, which prompts are you going to respond to and which effect. You don't have to talk about what you're going to be talking about. I literally just want to say I'm going to, prompt one, for example, copy the prompt and then just say, for this, I'm going to use, maybe you're going to use the persuasion effect or the information effect, right? And then why are you going to use that effect? Like, what do you hope it will do? Then once you start thinking about kind of these writing effects and these writing moves in that way, then I think the rhetorical situation from last week will become a little bit more clear too. So that's your first task. Your second task is to write the drafts, right? Just like last week, you wrote the draft for the Common App. This week, you're going to write the drafts of your PIQs. Again, if you have already submitted your PIQs, you can double dip one of them or revise one of them, but then I want you to try to write 3 other ones. And the reason is because even though you may have already submitted those, the PIQ questions are so broad that you can actually use a lot of them for scholarships. And so I want you to also have some of that already done and saved, because a lot of students will say, oh yeah, I was able to use this for a scholarship at the campus or whatever, right? And so you'll already have some of that written. All right, so that's your kind of your primary aim of this goal. Is, again, remember, these are drafts, not final drafts. These are drafts. Your mentor text for this week comes from the book The Maze Runner, and the focus is the semicolon. I love a good semicolon. And it's like this, I don't know, it's the piece of grammar that people want to use, but it gets used incorrectly all the time. But once you master it, it's amazing in your writing. So enjoy using the semicolon, enjoy playing with it. And that's our goal for the week. Okay, so I do have office hours. Again, Tuesday, Thursday, pop in anytime. Monday, Wednesday evening by appointment only. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I hope you have a great week.